Shalom, shalom. First and foremost, I'd like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Rakak Radash, that honors the apostles and elders of Great Millstone for teaching us His truth. And salutations to the sincere Akim and Akwat from your listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Brother Raquai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will is always an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I'm just going to be going through the title I have on the screen is called Dark-Skinned Native Americans, so-called Native Americans, right? So I came across this clip, and as a matter of fact, let me play the clip, and then I'll make my commentary and put out a couple scriptures. And as always, Yahweh Ratazah, Yahweh willing, that this lesson is edifying, right? So this is the clip here that I came across. All right, so I'm just going to play it.
Michael Jackson is not African and he's not from the Ivory Coast. Both of Michael Jackson's parents have American Indian roots. Michael Jackson has more connections to his American Indian heritage than his African heritage. And that's because his grandfather, Samuel, has two Choctaw Indian parents. So Samuel, Michael Jackson's grandfather, who resembles Michael.
So here on the left, you see that's the grandfather, Samuel, the father of Joe Jackson, right? And I think this is his son here, Prince.
Jackson's son was born to Emmeline and Nero Jackson. This is Emmeline's brother.
Right. So as well, another thing is as well, as I was doing some research as well, the guy on the right, his name was Nero Jackson. And another thing too, his name was actually named Israel as well. This is another fun fact. But I'm just gonna play the clip.
Brother. So Samuel Jackson, Michael Jackson's grandfather, who he grew up with, and there's a reason why I'm pointing this out, was raised by Emmeline and Nero Jackson. You see Samuel right there in Emmett County, Mississippi. This is Emmeline's father, Sanders Williams Daniels, and this is her mother, Fanny Dunn. So Michael Jackson's grandfather is American Indian with some African ancestry. And Samuel was a big part of Michael Jackson's life and taught Michael about his culture, his heritage, and his ancestry. It makes no sense for a Black American who has American Indian heritage to connect more with Africa when the American Indian heritage is more recent and more tangible. Why would I feel more connected to a 400-year-old DNA result than I do to the people who raised me? At some point, people need to wake up and stop gaslighting people into this belief that we all are missing something. I'm not missing something. I know who I am, as did Michael Jackson.
Right, so that's the clip. And I just wanted to touch on a couple of things in regards to this clip, right? So here you have, so Michael Jackson is one of those examples, he's an Israelite, but the point I really wanted to make in this lesson is the fact that there are a lot of Israelites, there are a lot of these so-called Native American tribes, sub-tribes, like here in the book it says, I'm reading like the Cherokee, the Creek, the Seminole, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, so on and so forth. There's a lot of these sub-tribes they were a lot darker back then, as well as like because they mixed with so-called Negroes, and a lot of them produced a lot of children that were essentially that had a lot more melanin in their skin. They looked a lot darker, kind of like your Wesley Snipes look, right? But they had more, I guess, that those Native American features, right? And in Michael Jackson, and those children, is the offspring of those. Essentially, they're the offspring of those children that are brought forth. And so, what I want to do is I want to read a couple paragraphs here. As a matter of fact, let's get a scripture. Okay, this is Hosea 1 verse 10, and it says, "Yet the number of children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured nor numbered. And it shall come to pass in that place where it said unto them, Ye are not my people, it shall be said, Ye are the sons of the living power. right? And that's very important because what Esau has really done, through his different legislation, is categorize, and also pseudoscience, excuse me. What he's done is also categorize you Israelites into a lot of like different check boxes, right? So you have, you so-called like black, so-called Hispanic, um, black, white, Hispanic, um, Pacific Islander, Asian, and then that's the only nations. Like, the Lord created a lot more nations than that, right? But really the point is because throughout our history, and this is a part of history that doesn't get talked about, and it's not. And what Esau portrays in his Hollywood movies, he portrays so-called Indians, so-called Native Americans in a particular way, in a particular fashion. It categorizes you Israelites into boxes, right? When you're a lot more than that, right? So, what I want to do here, I want to read a little bit from this book here. It's called Black Indians by William Loren Katz, right? The Hidden Heritage. It says here, so I want to read in page 162, and this is a picture I took of, I'll add it to the thumbnail as well, but this is a picture I also took from the book. So it says Black Cherokees owned barbershops, blacksmith shops, general stores, and restaurants. Some had printers, ferry boat operators, cotton gin managers, teachers, postmasters. Further down, it says collecting money for poor but interested parents, Black Indians built their own schools, hired and paid teachers, and asked for additional government aid. In 1866, government report on Black Creeks revealed that they are anxious that their children shall be educated and are determined to profit from the school form to their own advance, right? So they had a lot of their own establishments, right? So this is one of the examples of an establishment that you see on the screen here, right? This is this says early Oklahoma for children of color, right? So a lot of these so-called, they call them in the book, they refer to them as Black Indians, but a lot of them were essentially, a lot of them they were probably offspring of the fathers of a so-called Negro, or the women might be a so-called Negro, and the father could have been a so-called Cherokee or a so-called Choctaw or Chickasaw, right? And this is the product of the of what happened when essentially the tribes began to mix together, right? um, but here it says, continuing on. As a matter of fact, that's it on that. But I just want to get a little bit more on the mixing portion, right? Because the book also touches upon that. Okay, so what I want to do, this is page 36. Okay, it says it was in Mexico that Europeans tested the strongest to keep Africans apart from Native Americans, right? And when they say Africans, they're referring to, so-called Negroes. They're not referring to like Hamites. Um, it says black men far outnumbered their women and sought Indian wives, right? So here's the kicker. Native American wife meant if she was free, that children were born to her would be free and not slaves. So extensive was the contact between red and black people that Spanish law prohibited the two races from living together or marrying. And just before I move on as well, because um and this is one of Esau's devices, right? He's very, very crafty and clever with words, right? Like the scriptures say that his words were essentially smoother than butter, but his heart was drawing swords, right? And one of the things he's done is also categorize you, a lot of you so-called Native Americans and so-called Seminoles and so on and so forth, as red people when we're really just shades of brown. We're not shades of black, right? We're not black people, or you so-called Native Americans, you northern tribes, you are not red people. The only red people are Esau's descendants, the Edomites. Those are not your that is not a classification that is, that best describes you, right? um and that's to show that also excuse me, that also goes to show that these so-called Native Americans as well did suffer. They're under the curses as well. um it says Deuteronomy 28 verse 37, and it says, thou shalt become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword amongst all nations, whither the Lord shall lead thee. Right? So, this is another example of those bywords that were placed upon us as a people. So that bywords doesn't just fit, you so-called West Indians and Negroes. That also fits, you so-called Latin tribes, you so-called Native American tribes as well, the Northern Kingdom, right? Further on, it says, where was I? Just bear with me one second. So essentially, the Spanish law prohibited the two races. Well, the same race, but for the sake of context, that's what the book is saying, right? Because we're still all Israelites. It says Spanish law prohibited the two races from living together or marrying. It says as early as 1523, Hernando Cortez, it says, was given a royal order to keep Indians in their villages apart from Africans at all costs. This was only 7 years after Venice, Italy isolated its Jews in the first ghetto in history. The royal order forbade trade, commerce, or communication between the two peoples of color, right? So this is going to show that these so-called Native Americans had a particular hue, a darker hue as well, back in those days, and that was not long, that wasn't a long time ago, right? But Esau is very crafty with his essentially a his words, b his media, right? Okay, so I'll read that again. It says the one royal order. It says forbade trade, commerce, and communication between the two peoples of color. They were forbidden to sell chickens, fruit, vegetables, and both defied the law. Where was I? Okay, there's just a little bit more here, and I get a couple more scriptures, and I think that would be it. So it says racial mixing was so common in Mexico that it became hard to tell skin color, who was free and who was a slave. King Philip complained that young black Indians committed crimes and dressed as Indians so they can hide out with their mother's relatives and cannot be found. Genetic blending of the two peoples clearly the control we can control the control Europeans wanted over their slaves. Europeans feared that any dark person might be a slave driven to desperation or out of revenge. One, so this is a quote. It says by a so-called Spanish colonist, right? So it says one lived in constant fear, wrote a Spanish colonist, right? So essentially, I just wanted to bring out a couple points in regards to this because this is a lot of hidden history as well as, people don't really, when people associate, slavery or I guess transatlantic slave trade, like those sorts of periods, they don't really associate, you so-called Native Americans going into slavery. And America is a primary place where both of you, you so-called Native Americans and Latinos and Negroes were enslaved here, right? But most people commonly they know about transatlantic slave trade, right? So which also goes to show and prove, because the book also goes into this as well, that you had so-called Native Americans being enslaved by these colonists, by these slave traders, right? Let's get. Okay, Jeremiah 50, verse 33, and it says, "Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the children of Israel and the children of Judah," so you have both northern and southern kingdom, "were oppressed together. And all that took them captives held them fast and refused to let them go." Right? And America is that primary place where you had both the children of Judah, so you had the southern kingdom, as well as the northern kingdom being oppressed in this primarily this captivity, right? And essentially, this is what happens, through Esau's his legislation, his crafty counsel, and other different devices that he's done, especially the sword, right? Because that's what he was blessed with. A lot of our people, they lost a lot of the land and the heritage, right? And the book also goes into that. So I could probably make another second part to this, right? When you go into different uh, pieces of legis- pieces of legislation, like the reclassification. So, for example, a lot of so-called Native Americans, because they were so dark, they essentially they lost rights to the land, right? And a lot of wealth that they possessed was transferred to Esau, right? Because the book also it goes into a lot of the wealth that they had. You can look up something called the Dawes Act, Dawes Act, right? And that was one of the crafty counsels that Esau came up with in order to get a lot of the wealth and a lot of the land that you so-called Native Americans actually possessed, right? So this is also going to show that the prophecy it holds up, because a lot of you Israelites, from the northern tribes, they were oppressed in this particular time and particular land and this particular area known as America, right? So, um, let's see. There's a little bit more here. Um, Spare with me. Actually, that kind of covers it for now. I'll probably go more into it. Lord's will, I can make another part to this. Um, let's get a couple more precepts here. Oh, let's stay in Jeremiah. Okay, Jeremiah 12, verse 9, and it says, "Mine heritage is unto me as a speckled bird. The birds are round about are against her. Come ye, assemble all the beasts of the fields, come to devour, excuse me." Right? So, our people, will become essentially a speckled bird, with many different colors, because we've been scattered all over, right? You would have a lot of Israelites that look like the other nations, and then B, you have a lot of Israelites that typically, people might associate, might be a little bit more light skinned. They're actually a lot more essentially on the darker side, right? And you had a lot of Native Americans that actually look more like that, back in those days, back in the early 15 and 1600s, because they were able to hide and blend in, very similar to the Negroes, right? Going into the different accounts in the book here. And just bear with me on this. Okay, let's get Isaiah. Okay, this is Isaiah 45, verse 4, and it says, "For Jacob my servant's sake, and Israel mine elect, I have called thee by thy name, I have surnamed thee, though thou that though excuse me, though thou hast not known me. And one of the reasons I read this, it's because, all these different bywords, really we don't take on the title of Yahweh Bashem Yahushai. And a lot of our people hold on to these particular bywords even to this day. And these different bywords, like I was reading, the so-called Indian and black and red, and all these different things, all these different things really and truly keep us away from the Lord, because they're like us, they're another, that vibration is captivity, and our people are still in a mental captivity, and they haven't broken free from that, right? And coming back to their actual biblical bloodline and nationality. And another reason I read this in primarily is because the book also goes into a lot of joint ventures that so-called Negroes and so-called Indians had together, right? But they don't have a true understanding of who they are as a people. That's why it's so important to actually name ourselves and call ourselves Israelites, because it comes with a conduct, it comes with a heritage, it comes with a manner of life. Essentially, it's not just, it's not just essentially like a bloodline. There's a lot more that comes with it, right? Right? It's not just about, knowing, and knowing you're an Israelite. There's a facet, there's a manner, that Israelites walk, because the Lord created us to be a holy people, a separate people, right? We're not to be mingling with these other nations and so on and so forth, right? So that's one of the another reasons I wanted to read that as well, because our people, they mingle with the other nations, and they take on their customs. And scriptures say that the customs are essentially, their customs are vain, right? In Jeremiah, don't learn the ways of the heathen, right? And that's one of the things our people have done, because they don't know who they are, right? They haven't taken on that surname, that last name, that name of Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, knowing that you're an Israelite, right? So, um, anyways, I think I'll wrap it up here. But Lord's will, as always, this video was edifying, and I'd like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Rakak Wadash. Honors to the apostles and elders, great millstone, teaching us his truth. Till next time, I say Shalom.